There is a strange moment that happens right before you begin something important. A quiet resistance, a heaviness that settles in your chest, a voice that whispers, maybe later, maybe tomorrow, maybe when you feel ready. You know this feeling. Everyone does. The desk is clean, the morning light is soft, your coffee warm, your intentions clear. Yet your body does not move. You hover between wanting to start and wanting to escape, caught in a fragile pause that feels longer than it should. Andrew Huberman often says that motivation is not something you wait for. It is something you generate. But the surprising part, the part that almost feels like a paradox, is that the brain does not give you the chemicals of motivation before you act. It gives them after the action begins. Motivation is not the spark, it is the smoke, the signal, the reward for having crossed the threshold. And this is where the 5-minute rule becomes almost magical. Because the brain does not need a perfect plan, or the right mood, or a dramatic surge of inspiration. It only needs 5 minutes of engagement to shift your internal chemistry from resistance to momentum. 5 minutes to flip the switch from avoidance to approach. 5 minutes to change your relationship with the task in front of you. Imagine if you trusted that. Imagine if you allowed yourself those 5 minutes, without pressure, without judgment, without outcome. Your life might look different, not because you suddenly became more disciplined, but because you finally understood the real architecture of motivation. So let us explore what happens inside those first 5 minutes, and why your brain has been misunderstanding them all along. If this already resonates with you, if you felt that familiar tension between wanting to begin and wanting to escape, I am grateful that you are here. If you would like to keep exploring your mind with me, feel free to subscribe so these quiet reflections keep finding you. And if this speaks to you, you may comment, "I am ready," as a small signal to yourself that the shift has already begun. Most people imagine motivation as a feeling that arrives first, a kind of bright spark that appears in the mind and makes beginning effortless. But if you have lived long enough, you know the spark rarely comes when you need it. What comes instead is friction, a slow, invisible pressure that pushes against every attempt to start. The power of the 5-minute disruption is that it does not try to eliminate this friction. It interrupts it. It cuts into the resistance with something so small, so gentle, that the brain cannot recognize it as a threat. The act of beginning for only 5 minutes becomes a psychological loophole, a way of stepping forward without triggering the full weight of avoidance. The truth is that your brain is wired to conserve energy. Andrew Huberman often talks about how the brain's default state leans toward inaction, unless a clear signal tells it otherwise. This is why starting feels heavier than continuing. The brain interprets starting as a cost, an expenditure, a risk, but 5 minutes does not feel like a cost. It feels like a whisper. It feels like something too small to resist. This is where the disruption happens. You bypass the defensive reflex by offering your brain a smaller opening, one it does not feel compelled to shut down. Once you step through this opening, something subtle shifts. 5 minutes is long enough for the body to settle, the breath to deepen, the nervous system to soften. It is long enough for your attention to gather itself, long enough for the world around you to quiet. But most importantly, it is long enough for the brain to begin releasing the neurochemicals that support engagement, chemicals that do not appear before you act, but because you act. This is the quiet secret behind the 5-minute disruption. Motivation is not the cause of action. It is the effect. When you begin something with a 5-minute window, you are not committing to perfection or productivity. You are committing to presence. This presence carries its own momentum. After 5 minutes, the task often feels less threatening. The internal noise fades. The mental resistance loses its sharpness. You discover that the hardest part was not the task, it was the threshold. And the threshold is always temporary. The beauty of the 5-minute disruption is that it works even on the days when you feel empty, overwhelmed, or disconnected. It works because it does not depend on your emotional state. It only depends on your willingness to give yourself a small beginning. 5 minutes does not promise transformation, but it opens the door to it. And sometimes opening the door is enough to change everything that comes next. This is where the deeper story begins, the moment your brain pushes back against the first step, and how understanding that pushback changes your entire relationship with action. There is a moment right after you decide to begin, often within the first breath, the first movement, the first tiny shift, when something deep inside you pushes back. It is subtle but unmistakable, a tightening in the chest, a slight heaviness in the shoulders, a quiet voice insisting that this is not the right time, that you are not prepared, that the effort will be too much. This inner resistance can feel personal, like a flaw in your character, as if you lack discipline or strength. But Andrew Huberman explains that this pushback is biological, not moral. It comes from neural circuits designed to protect you from unnecessary exertion. Your brain is not judging you. It is guarding its energy. This defensive reflex is strongest in the seconds before the task begins, because the brain magnifies the cost of action when the outcome is unknown. It imagines the difficulty before it experiences the reality. The anterior cingulate cortex senses potential conflict between intention and comfort, and sends signals that feel like reluctance, hesitation, or emotional heaviness. The brain interprets this conflict as danger, even when the task is harmless. This is why starting feels painful, not because the task is hard, but because your brain is predicting that it will be. What makes this moment tricky is that the resistance feels like truth. It feels logical. Your mind starts offering excuses disguised as insights. I should do something else first. I do not have the right energy right now. I will start after 1 more minute. These thoughts appear rational, but they are simply the cognitive version of flinching. The brain is trying to retreat to a place of lower effort. It wants the familiar, the predictable, the immediately soothing, and distraction delivers exactly that. But something interesting happens when you acknowledge this pushback without obeying it. You realize that resistance is not a command. It is a signal, a sign that you are crossing a threshold your brain finds uncertain. This is where Huberman's work becomes profoundly liberating. He explains that once you begin moving, even slightly, the sympathetic nervous system activates in a way that supports action, not avoidance. The very circuits that resisted you begin to assist you. Momentum replaces hesitation. Presence replaces projection. The brain stops predicting the difficulty and starts participating in the experience. This is why the first seconds feel heavy and the following minutes feel lighter. The brain recalibrates. It shifts from guarding its energy to using it. And with each small motion, you feel the weight inside you change shape, not disappearing entirely, but transforming into something manageable, something familiar, something that no longer controls you. In this subtle shift, a quiet clarity emerges. You begin to understand that the resistance was never proof of weakness. It was proof that your brain was doing its job. And the moment you step past that initial pushback, you enter the territory where motivation can finally begin to form. And standing in that territory leads us into the heart of the 5-minute principle itself. What happens inside the brain once action actually begins? Once you cross the threshold and begin, truly begin, your brain starts shifting in ways that feel almost invisible at first. A slight steadying of your breath, a softening of the tension behind your eyes, a subtle clarity that was not available a moment earlier. Andrew Huberman explains that this shift is not mystical or motivational. It is mechanical. The moment you engage in an action, even at the smallest scale, you activate neural circuits that change the chemistry of your state. The very systems that felt heavy and resistant just seconds ago begin to support your movement forward. One of the key players in this transition is dopamine. People misunderstand dopamine as the molecule that creates motivation. But Huberman clarifies that dopamine is released when the brain registers forward action, not intention, not desire, but motion. The instant you begin working, your brain releases a modest increase in dopamine that signals, "We are doing the thing." This small rise is enough to quiet the threat detection circuits in the limbic system, the ones that were telling you the task was too much. It is the body's way of saying, "Proceed, it is safe to continue." At the same time, another shift happens in the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with planning, decision-making, and sustained focus. Before you start, this area is in conflict, caught between intention and avoidance. But as you begin to engage, the prefrontal cortex receives a stabilizing effect from dopamine and norepinephrine. Huberman often describes these neurochemicals as the blend that creates alert but calm. Not frantic, not pressured, just engaged. The first 5 minutes allow this blend to rise, turning effort into something tolerable, even grounding. This is why people often say, "I did not want to start, but once I did, it was not so bad." The brain literally needs those first minutes to reorganize itself around the task. Movement signals commitment. Commitment signals safety. Safety signals focus. And as these internal messages align, the nervous system shifts from protective withdrawal to active participation. There is another layer to this process, the reduction of limbic friction. The limbic system, responsible for emotional reactions, avoidance, and threat detection, stays loudest during inaction. It protests the unknown and favors comfort. But once action begins, limbic activity decreases because the brain stops forecasting danger and starts responding to real-time experience. Huberman notes that even small, consistent actions dramatically reduce limbic friction over time, making future beginnings easier. The first 5 minutes are not just a temporary trick, they are a form of neural training. As you continue those first minutes, something even deeper shifts. Your identity begins to update. Your brain notices, "I am someone who is doing the thing." And identity, once engaged, becomes one of the strongest motivators of all. You begin to feel aligned, steadier, less fragmented. This is the secret at the core of the 5-minute principle. Those first moments are not about productivity, they are about signaling. You are teaching your brain what kind of person you are becoming. And this understanding leads naturally into the next step, how to escape the gravitational pull of inaction with softness instead of force. There is a kind of gravity inside inaction, a pull that grows stronger the longer you sit still. It is not laziness. It is not a flaw in your personality. It is simply the nervous system doing what it has learned to do: conserve energy, avoid uncertainty, and stay close to comfort. Andrew Huberman often explains that the brain's default state is not movement, but conservation. The body wants to maintain equilibrium, and anything that threatens that balance, effort, discomfort, uncertainty, creates internal resistance. Escaping this gravity is not about overpowering the system. It is about reducing the weight that makes movement feel impossible. The first step is softening the environment around you. People underestimate how sensitive the brain is to cues, visual noise, clutter, open tabs, unfinished tasks. Each one signals too much, increasing cognitive load before you even begin. Huberman emphasizes that lowering sensory clutter lowers internal friction. When your environment feels lighter, the threshold to action feels lower. A tidy desk is not a productivity hack, it is a neurological kindness. The second step is narrowing the first action. When the brain confronts a large, undefined task, it anticipates overwhelming effort. It exaggerates the energy required. This triggers avoidance, which deepens the gravitational pull of inaction. But when the first step is small, almost ridiculously small, the brain relaxes. 5 minutes feels safe. Open the document feels safe. Write one sentence feels safe. These micro-actions reduce the perceived cost, and as Huberman notes, the brain's willingness to move increases when the cost appears manageable. The third step involves breath and physiology. Before action, the body often enters a subtle stress state. Shallow breathing, tightened shoulders, slight agitation. This amplifies the brain's desire to avoid effort, but shifting your physiology shifts your willingness. Slow, intentional exhales calm the autonomic nervous system. A brief walk resets the noradrenaline system. Even adjusting posture signals readiness rather than retreat. Huberman calls this using the body to control the mind, not the other way around. The fourth step is removing the emotional weight of outcome. The fear of failing, disappointing yourself, or not meeting expectations adds invisible heaviness to the task. But when the goal becomes simply, be here for 5 minutes, the pressure dissolves. Your brain stops trying to evaluate and starts trying to experience. And experience is far easier to enter than expectation. And then there is the final step, compassion. Not the soft, vague kind, but the grounded form that understands what the brain is trying to do. When you stop blaming yourself for resistance, the resistance weakens. Shame tightens the nervous system, but understanding relaxes it. Huberman's research shows that self-directed frustration narrows cognitive flexibility, while self-directed understanding restores it. Compassion is not emotional decoration, it is neurological leverage. As these elements come together, lighter environment, smaller beginnings, calmer physiology, gentler expectations, and real compassion, you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a long time, the possibility of ease, not the absence of effort, but the absence of unnecessary struggle. And in that ease, something new becomes available, a deeper, quieter recalibration of what motivation truly means. There is a moment, usually quiet and easy to miss, when your relationship with effort begins to soften. It happens after you have stepped through resistance, after you have lowered friction, after you have allowed yourself those first small actions. Something in the nervous system shifts, almost like the unclenching of a fist you did not realize you were making. This is the beginning of recalibration, the point where motivation stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like alignment. According to Andrew Huberman, the brain continually rewrites its understanding of effort based on the states you place it in most consistently. When you give it experiences of gentle beginnings, rather than overwhelming ones, it learns that effort is safe. It learns that starting is not a threat. This recalibration does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives with subtlety. You may notice that the task feels less jagged around the edges, that your attention stays with you a little longer, that the voice urging you to escape fades into the background. These small changes are signs that your dopamine system is stabilizing. When dopamine rises slowly and naturally, through engagement rather than stimulation, the baseline begins to repair itself. Huberman explains that healthy motivation depends not on big dopamine peaks, but on maintaining a steady baseline that supports sustained effort. The gentle 5-minute entry, repeated over time, teaches your brain to expect engagement, not avoidance. Another layer of recalibration is identity. Without forcing it, without declaring it, without trying to prove anything, you begin to experience yourself as someone who starts, someone who returns, someone who follows through, not perfectly, not dramatically, but steadily. Identity is not built from intention. It is built from repeated states of being. Each time you cross the threshold into action, you give your brain evidence of who you are becoming, and the brain responds to evidence more deeply than it responds to thought. There is also a kind of emotional uncluttering that happens. When beginning becomes gentler, the pressure inside you starts to dissolve. You no longer feel the need to manufacture inspiration. You no longer wait for motivation to arrive like weather. You begin to understand that motivation emerges from movement, not before it. This realization removes so much hidden weight from your mind. It allows you to live from a place of steadiness rather than urgency. And then, almost without noticing, a calm kind of confidence forms. Not the loud confidence of ambition, but the quiet confidence of someone who knows they can begin again and again. Someone who trusts that 5 minutes is enough to shift their state. Someone who no longer fears the threshold, because the threshold has become familiar. This is the serenity at the end of the arc, The understanding that motivation is not a mystery, not a miracle, not a force you must chase. It is a rhythm you create, a relationship you build. A signal your brain learns to send when you show it repeatedly. That starting is safe. And if something in you softened while listening, if you felt even a small sense of possibility returning, you may write, "I am shifting," in the comments, as a quiet marker of the change already unfolding inside you. If you stayed with me until now, I want to thank you with real sincerity. Videos like this are not entertainment. They are moments of reflection we choose because some part of us is tired of fighting our own mind. And if this journey helped you understand your motivation a little more gently, I would be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. It allows this space to keep growing, and it reminds you to return to the places that help you breathe a little deeper. If the 5-minute shift touched you even quietly, you can write "I receive" in the comments as a way of anchoring the change inside yourself. And if you want to keep exploring the psychology behind motivation, attention, and learning, I invite you to watch the next video. Your mind may be ready for its next gentle step. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for returning to yourself today.